All right. Howdy, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. So today we're so happy to have Dr. Gary Knox, our exceptional guest from the University of Florida. Dr. Knox is professor of environmental horticulture and nursery crops extension specialist and to the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences and to the North Florida Research and Education Center in Quincy. He received his bachelor degree from the Pennsylvania State University and his master degree and a PhD degree from Purdue University. Dr. Knox is heavily involved in research and extension on nursery landscape problems like pollinator plants, critical bar skill, rosette disease, invasive plants, and other emerging pest diseases and problems. On a more uplifting note, he is also overseeing development of gardens of the Big Bend, a new botanical teaching and evaluation garden located on the grounds of North Florida Research and Education Center and the site of many plant evaluation activities. So with that, would you please give your full attention to Dr. Knox and help me in welcome him to the stage? Dr. Knox.
Morning, everyone. Let me get wired up here. Good afternoon. Yeah. It's good morning somewhere. Well, hello, everyone. I can't tell you how happy I am to be here. For one thing, it's been such a long COVID nightmare. It's so wonderful to actually be able to see people and interact in person, face to face. Even if we have a mask on, at least we're interacting face to face. And I had a tremendous day going around with Dr. Arnold this morning in the gardens and the Hort Trek, and then this afternoon with Dr. Shin and Bin and Runchi, and going to see Dr. Byrne out at the roses out there. It's been a really wonderful day. And again, I've missed it so much, the idea of interacting and seeing things and pointing things out. And I've learned so much as well, getting little tips on how people do things here and how I might be able to apply it back in Quincy and so on. So it's been wonderful. Thank you. I also have to applaud you for your long history of having a seminar series like this and bringing in outside speakers. That is so fantastic that you've been able to sustain this through budget cuts and COVID and everything else. I really have to applaud you because, again, it's this interaction that you can get from a speaker actually being here rather than zooming in, which has gotten used to doing, but it's nice to do this once in a while too. So with that, let me go ahead and get started with my presentation. What I'm going to do today is give you a little overview of the gardens, specifically our volunteer group, as well as the 11 gardens that compose the botanical garden. And then I'm going to go into depth on our plant conservation efforts that we've been able to accomplish at the garden through our plant collections. And again, focusing in particular on our Magnolia collection. And then I'll finally just kind of wrap up talking about funding, impacts, future, and where we go from here, all right? So I like to start off by showing you, actually physically what it looks like where I am. So this is the main building for the North Florida Research and Education Center. And like the Texas A&M system, University of Florida has research stations scattered throughout the state to work on the various climates, crops, and soils that vary so much throughout our state from north to south. And ours is in northern Florida, literally about 6 miles from the Georgia-Florida border, as a matter of fact. And ours is one of the most diverse in terms of the crops that we work on, because we work with forestry, forages, row crops like cotton and soybeans and peanuts. We do vegetables, we do fruits, we do ornamentals, and then we also have the plant pathology, entomology, and soil and water science that goes along with all this as well. So we're quite diverse. There are about 14 PhDs located there. So we are sort of a mini university, if you will. One of the advantages of being on the site is that it also happens to have 1,000 acres. So they had a little bit of room to spare to allow us to do a little botanical garden that we were calling Gardens of the Big Bend, as I said. And to give you some perspective as to where we are as compared to where y'all are, you can see that the red star is the location of the Quincy Research Station, just west of Tallahassee. We're in hardiness zone 8B, and you can sort of see the map of Texas there to the left and how we relate to that and how we relate to you and your climate. So we're actually very similar climates here. We might get a little bit more rainfall, but that would be probably the primary difference. We are called Gardens of the Big Bend, and when we refer to the Big Bend in Florida, we're actually referring to this area. Can you see the cursor there, I hope? Yeah, we're actually referring to this area where the panhandle sort of bends down into the peninsula. So that's why it's Big Bend. I know Texas has got a Big Bend too, so I just have to try to distinguish that a little bit. All right, this is our new signage, an image of our new signage for Gardens of the Big Bend. And we're so very proud of having some nice looking signs for the garden now. But I don't want to mislead you. We're actually kind of a shoestring operation when it comes to running a botanical garden. Having said so, we don't have the beautiful displays of bedding plants and big, colorful bedding plant displays, or we don't have a lot of the hardscape that a lot of gardens can have these days, or at least not yet, we don't. But what we do have is a plant-oriented garden, and I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but what I'm really referring to is that we're really focusing on the plants in our collections rather than the infrastructure that surrounds the gardens itself. So, as I said, this is the Gardens of the Big Bend, I really have to give credit where credit is due because we don't have a line item in the budget of the University of Florida to run Gardens of the Big Bend. What we do have is about 30% of my time that's spent there, about 50% of the time of my technician Kelly is spent there. And then NFREC does contribute, as I'll mention in a moment. But what I do have is a core of dedicated volunteers who have come out and really sustained the garden for us. And they formed in 2007 from just a group of avid gardeners and some folks from the green industry. They're called Gardening Friends of the Big Bend. They're an official 501c3 nonprofit corporation, and they really are the labor force that works out in the gardens. They're out there planting, pruning, fertilizing, watering, anything we need to do that way. And they also happen to have monthly meetings. They also have special events where they're bringing in speakers. And so they're actually a pretty dynamic group. And probably everything I say, I should couch with the terminology pre-COVID, because certainly during COVID, a lot of this has been shut down. So Gardening Friends, I can't say enough about them. But so when it comes to the actual alliance of NFREC and the Gardening Friends, NFREC provides a lot of the basic maintenance, mowing, tree care, herbicide applications, anything that involves a tractor, pretty much. And the Gardening Friends there are there, as you can see, they were cutting back perennials in spring in the photo on the right. And they do the mulching and the fertilizing and the planting and the pruning and so forth like that. And we are a small group. Quincy is in a rural area located about 30 miles from Tallahassee. But that distance, even though it's not very great, it's still not quite enough to draw large numbers of volunteers from Tallahassee. So it is a regional effort, but it's still fairly local and fairly rural in nature. So that's how we operate the gardens currently. And again, it's a partnership of the two groups. And so now I thought I'd tell you a little bit about the mission of Gardens of the Big Bend. And there are really four short and sweet components to the mission of Gardens of the Big Bend. One is to act as a living laboratory where we can bring in new plants and evaluate them for our climatic conditions in North Florida. And so the photo on the left is a plant called Clappertonia ficofolia. And it was introduced to us by a Central Florida nurseryman a number of years ago and has become to be a huge hit, quite popular, quite beautiful plant. On the right shows you some plants from the azaleas and camellias in the background. That's the other way that we can be a living laboratory, is to evaluate some of the new plants that the branding programs are coming out with, some of the other plants that perhaps university folks are developing and want to send somewhere to see how they perform. So that's another way that we're a living laboratory. Our second mission statement is to be a living classroom. And we can actively do that through giving tours, like you see in the photos there, but also we are striving to have good labels on all of our plants so they can learn something there. We're also starting to put out interpretive signage so that they can understand what the gardens are intending to be, so that they can learn passively as well as actively through programs that we have there. Our third mission is to be a germplasm repository. And this is something that we've keyed in on as something a small garden like us can do and can make a statement with in terms of germplasm repository. And so this is something I'll go into later, the idea of trying to help conserve rare, unusual, or endangered species. And finally, we just hope that we're a place of inspiration, that people can come visit us, see the plants that we have there, see the gardens that we have, and recognize that it's a place of beauty, a place of relaxation, a place that they can see beautiful plants and be inspired to go home and do something more, whether it's in their own gardens or whether it's a window in an apartment. We hope that they can be inspired by what they see there. So those are the four basic missions of Gardens of the Big Bend. And now this is a little bit close-up of a map, and this shows our gardens, and we actually currently have 11 gardens, and that's why we're called Gardens, plural, of the Big Bend. And each of the gardens has a plant or other sort of theme associated with the garden. And so I'll kind of go through these one by one for the ones shown on the map here. So starting on the north side of the garden, this is our palm garden, kind of self-explanatory. This area is our newest garden, and this is the Robert and Elaine Woodward Heritage Garden. It's a garden for which we have an endowment pledged, and we've raised about $15,000 to do some preliminary work. And this garden is going to focus on plants that were important to Native Americans, to pioneers, and to residents of the Gadsden County area up into the early 1900s, if you will. So it's going to be a fun garden to go to. The third garden is our Jurassic garden, which is where we have conifers and cycads. And we're calling it Jurassic to hopefully get a little peak of interest from youth. As you know, dinosaurs do everything for them, right? The fourth garden is our native showcase garden, focusing on native plants that do well in landscapes. I'm not going to try to duplicate Florida's ecology here, just the ones that will do well in landscapes in terms of natives. The fifth is the Pavilion Shade Garden, again, fairly self-explanatory. Sixth is a Champion Arboretum. And it is really kind of an artificially designated area, but it's all along the fence line along the highway. And the idea is to plant showy trees and large shrubs so that we can hopefully get the attention of people who drive down the highway without causing accidents. You know, kind of critical. So we want their attention, but to a point. The seventh garden is our Discovery Garden, which consists of new, improved, and underutilized plants that we're trying to make people realize or become aware of. The ninth garden here is our dry garden, and it celebrates plants that with extremely low water requirements. And I've got photos I'll show you. And the eighth garden is a transition garden. This is our Mediterranean garden. So these plants need a little bit more water than the dry garden, but not as much as the Discovery Garden and beyond. So that's the names of the gardens. I think I've got some quick photos that I'll show you that, you know, it's hard to capture a garden in photos, as I realized as I was trying to take pictures of this, but hopefully you'll get an idea. So this is the palm garden, and currently we have 19 genera and 40 species in the palm garden. It's fairly young. There are a few specimens that were planted in 2007, but most of them were planted in 2013, as you can see. The next is the Robert and Elaine Woodward Heritage Garden, and this is the one that we don't have the funds for yet, but we got $15,000 to put in this case, a foundation for what will be a patio or gathering area there. And we've got a gazebo, some seating, and some initial planting of trees that will become the walls of the garden, so to speak, in the future. This is the Jurassic garden with some good-sized conifers here and there, the Atlantic white cedar and the Toria tree, endangered Toria tree. Just a couple other shots where we do have some younger specimens in there, all ready to grow, waiting on them to grow. The native showcase garden, which is pretty much trees and large shrubs. The pavilion shade garden, again, you can see the foundation for our pavilion there in the background. And then you can see some of the collections of azaleas and camellias there. As well as we planted a lot of trees that we hope will make some shade for us in 10 or 15 years. So we've got a plan for the future, right? Another shot there. The Champion Arboretum along the highway, as I mentioned. The Mediterranean garden with grasses in it. It's got some conifers there, vitex, bottle brush, plants like that. And then there's the dry garden, and it consists of a 160-foot-long berm composed of sand, gravel, and 3.5 tons of boulders. And it's about 6 feet tall, and it is a south-facing berm, so the garden is south-facing to maximize the sun exposure, and then, of course, the sand and gravel provides excellent drainage. And as you'll see, we have an awful lot of agaves that are featured here that are so very striking when they flower, as well as we've got herbs. We've got a lot of Texas and Mexico natives, thanks to connections with John Ferry Garden. We've got dichias, we've got bulbs, and the latest addition actually are Florida dune plants. We found they're adapted very well to the situation. So kind of a fun garden. Magnolia garden is how it all started, and we've got a notable collection of the deciduous hybrids that are so showy in spring. But we also have some of the newer evergreen hybrids as on the left, as well as evergreen species as on the right. And then, what some of you have been waiting for, this is the photo of our crepe myrtle collection. We have about 100 cultivars of crepe myrtle here. And more notably, I think to me, is we have 9 species of Lagerstromia that have been very interesting to have and very valuable to have as well. So I think that's kind of last one, the Discovery Garden. And this is new, improved, and underutilized plants. The lovely Chinese fringe tree there in flower. Lots of shade areas for interesting low-growing perennials. Got a sunny perennial border that is particularly showy, especially with the salvias this time of year. And just another shot of that, give you a sense there. So, okay, where'd all the plants come from? And what are we talking about here in terms of time frame? The gardens legitimately started in 2009, so we're a little more than 10 years old. And the plants, though, I have been gathering for probably 25 years or more in some cases. What can I say? I'm a hoarder, right? So the plants came from universities, they came from nurseries, from plant brands, botanical gardens, organizations and societies, plant collectors, and wild collected. And really, plants people are so very generous. And so all you had to do is say the word and people would load you down with plants. And many times it was just me driving up and down the road to see who would give me a plant or two that I could throw in the back and haul back to Quincy. But really, it's been all these wonderful organizations that have helped to contribute and make this garden what it is. And the last item on the list, the wild collection, is what leads me to talk more about our plant conservation efforts, because the wild collected, as I'll go into in detail, really have been key to getting some of the particularly endangered and vulnerable species into our collection. So I mentioned that our garden does serve as a germplasm repository, and we can keep individual specimens of a number of endangered, rare, or unusual species. The first 3 in the list are native to Florida, for example, and the others are native to other parts of the world. And the plant in the photo is actually the ash magnolia that you'll hear more about in the future, but it's a fascinating plant that's endangered in Florida, found only in Florida. So plant conservation, the idea of having collections of plants offers tremendous opportunities for research above and beyond display and appreciation and awareness, okay? There are three main areas. Let's see if I can remember them. The first is when you have a collection of a genus, for example, it gives you the opportunity for taxonomic research to compare the differences of what makes one species different from another species. Or, you can even do molecular work these days if you have the tools and training. A second advantage of having plant collections is it offers sort of ecological comparisons, if you will. You can have all various species of a genus planted in one location, in one soil, in one climate, and you can learn more about the plants by comparing their performance to each other, not just finding out which ones are doing best in that particular location, but also how ones from other parts of the world or other habitats are behaving in a landscape situation, let's face it. And some things that are perfectly not adaptable in the wild habitat may be adaptable in a landscape situation. You can cultivate it. The other big aspect from sort of an ecological standpoint when you have a collection of species within a genus is when you have an emerging pest or disease and you need to determine just how widely this is going to be a problem for you, you have all the resources at hand there to test it across a large number of species. And this is one of the reasons why I became involved with Dr. Gu and her program on crepe myrtle bark scale, because I had this large Lagerstromia collection that I was able to leverage and feed her program with a wide variety of germplasm. Sort of the, let's see, I did taxonomy, ecological. Oh, I knew this would happen to me. There's one other advantage to having a plant collection like this, and it escapes me right now. I'm sure it'll come to me. But anyway, so this is one of the reasons why it's a valid goal to try to do this collection. It's not just adding up the numbers, it's being able to have a representative sample of a genus or a group of plants in one location to evaluate their comparative performance there, and gives you opportunity for doing research too. And the third area of research that just occurred to me is the opportunity for conservation. The idea that you are holding a representative of an endangered species in your site, that it is can act as backup, if you will, in case the plant was extirpated in the wild or is limited basis. So that's an advantage there. It also gives you the opportunity to do some studies of reproductive studies. The floral biology of an endangered species, the pollination biology of an endangered species, very critical. And then one can also do propagation studies, which is what we've done at Quincy, to asexually and sexually propagate that plant so that it can be distributed more widely, and in unfortunate event, at least be backed up in more than one location. So those are really the opportunities that one has with plant collections, not just as a, gee, this is great to have and to show, but you can do something really valuable with it once you have it. So this shot shows you two of the collections, Magnolia collection and the Lagerstromia collection. As I mentioned, as you can gather, we have conifers. We have something like 44 species of conifers there now. We have 35 big leaf hydrangeas and 11 to 15 oak leaf hydrangeas. We have 40 cultivars of camellia representing, I think it's 12 or 15 species. We've got a Calicarpa collection of 9 or 10 species so far, plus a few cultivars. And then the palms, I think I mentioned earlier, 19 genera, 40 some species, and succulents I didn't add up, sorry. It's too many for me to count right away, but a heck of a lot of those too. The other thing that the collections do for you is, and it's not what they do for you, but what you can do with the collection, is you can get recognition for the collection from professional organizations that will do two things. One, they'll be aware of your collection and the resources that you have. Secondarily, it can help potentially bring traffic to your site as these organizations promote the gardens that have specific locations. So the American Conifer Society recognizes us as a conifer reference garden, that they encourage people to go to see a wide array of different kinds of conifers. And frankly, they love us because most northern conifer collections are all firs and spruces and things like that. Well, we have some weird podocarps and other things that we can highlight in our garden. I think at one time we were the southernmost conifer reference garden. The big enchilada in my book was to the magnolias being inducted as part of the National Collection of Magnolia. And so the USDA has organized with the American Public Gardens Association what they're calling the Plant Collections Network, which is a way to identify gardens that hold significant collections of a particular genus or species. And this is something that England and Europe has been doing for decades, and the US is now finally picking up on this as well. And things like oaks and magnolias and maples and so on, you can't have all the species in one location because they're so varied and so diverse. So in this case, there are currently 17 gardens that compose the National Collection of Magnolias, of which the Gardens of the Big Bend is one of them. And once you have this in with the group, then it's also a lot easier to exchange germplasm and plant material with the other gardens that are also affiliated with this designation. So it's been great to have. It's also great to show the bosses up the line too, that, hey, this isn't just a fad here. So I'm going to go into more detail now about magnolias and the Magnolia Garden at Gardens of the Big Bend. And I wanted to start with a little facts and figures about magnolias. We all probably know that there are some that are native to the US. We all probably know that there are some are native to China and Asia. But what you may not realize is their range is much broader than realized. And China and that area of Asia probably holds about half the number of species of Magnolia, and there are over 330 species identified right now. But it's been in the last 20 years that there have been discoveries of magnolias in Mexico, Central America, and South America that has added another 100 species to the list. And frankly, that's an area where there's still ripe for exploration, if you will, of new species there too. So it is a large family, a widely distributed family, 300 plus species. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature did a red list where they evaluated the conservation status of all the species of magnolias back in 2016. At that point, they estimated that almost half of all the magnolia species were threatened with extinction, largely due to logging, farming, urban development, and so on, and climate change, and so on and so forth. A big chunk of species needed more data for them to assess them. And then the surprising thing was that in situ or nature preserves were going to be extremely important to preserve the species, but it was also important to have backups in botanical gardens and what it's called ex situ cultivation, but only 43% of the endangered magnolias were found. So there is in collections. So this really impressed upon everybody, the whole community, the need to get out there, document what's out there, preserve what's there in the wild, and then start backing up the collections in botanical gardens. So that's been one of the things that we've been able to do at Quincy. And when I started putting this talk together, I went back and I realized, I spent my career working on magnolias unintentionally. It started off as a sort of a plant passion, but it kind of grew from there into something more. And also I realized that the garden was kind of founded with a little bit of chutzpah, a lot of dumb luck, and a lot of perseverance as well. So there. And it started back in 1996 when I had the audacity to write to Dr. J.C. Ralston at the North Carolina State Arboretum, who was a world-renowned plant, greatly respected. And I asked him if he would have some magnolias that he could share with me so that I could start a magnolia collection down in Florida. And not a month later, I get a box with 19, species and cultivars of magnolias. And it was such a huge deal. And of course, after his passing, they renamed the Arboretum after him. So we all know it as the J.C. Ralston Arboretum in Raleigh, North Carolina today. So I feel quite honored that such a prominent plantsman was one who has helped me start with magnolias way back when. The Magnolia Society was something else that I discovered way back in the 90s, and how important that networking group is. It turned out there was an individual who lived about 50 miles from where we were, who got a PhD in botany working on, guess what, Magnolia. And in the process of working on this PhD of Magnolia, he amassed a huge collection in a private garden on a farm that his parents have. And he gave me free rein to go to the garden and propagate whatever I could propagate, which was amounted to about 25 species and 60 cultivars. So that was the first bit of dumb luck in terms of meeting this guy and making this connection. The next thing that happened has to do with the book, The World of Magnolias, which was published in the mid-90s by Dorothy Calloway. And it is the sort of the premier textbook on Magnolia taxonomy, even still today, although it's dated a bit. And it turned out that Dorothy lived 20 miles from me and happened to have a Magnolia mail order nursery. And in 1997, she and her husband were relocating, so she had to liquidate the nursery stock. And lo and behold, I got a gift of 25 Magnolia species and cultivars from her. So just in a matter of 2 or 3 years, my numbers were racking up pretty quickly. And for those of you younger students out there, this is what they call a letter, okay? And that's the way we communicated back then. And I was kind of surprised I still had some of this, but anyway. And then just from there on, things kind of snowballed, because once you start collecting, once you start meeting people, so Augie Kerr on the left was a breeder in North Carolina, and I got some, a number of his releases of magnolias. Bob McCartney was at Trail Ridge Nursery in Florida, and he had just by chance happened to have a dozen magnolias that were unusual, and could I use them? And so things just snowballed from there. And it was in about 2000 that the first magnolias then were planted at Quincy in the ground per se. Up until that point, I'd been hoarding them, as I say. So the last little aspect of dumb luck that comes in here has to do with location and wild collection. And the diagram, the charts there show the number of endemic species, and endemic means a species that is found nowhere else in that geographical barrier, if you will. And you can see upper left is amphibians, upper right is birds, middle left is fish, middle right is mammals, lower left is reptiles, and lower right are trees. And the redder the area, the more endemic species, rare species that are found in that area. And so you can see by dumb luck, the fact that I happen to be located in the Florida Panhandle meant that I was close to a lot of endemic species, a lot of rare species, a biodiversity hotspot, if you will. And so it really hasn't been until recent years, but then we've been able to leverage that in terms of getting permits to explore and get some new specimens that way as well. Again, the timeline here, the nonprofit group in 2007, the gardens formally started in 2009. We were designated a part of the National Collection of Magnolia in 2012. And then since then, again, you build up this network of people, of breeders, of taxonomists, of university scientists that end up facilitating this wonderful experiment in terms of exploring and helping to preserve a genus. So by the numbers then, and I said I wasn't going to do this, but here it is. So we have 112 cultivars of Magnolia in the garden. We have 40 species and botanical varieties in the garden. 6 of them are wild collected, 5 of them are native, and roughly 158 unique Magnoliaceae specimens. Of the cultivars, the vast majority of them are deciduous, which is expected because it's largely the deciduous ones that have been cultivated worldwide for their flowers. But it's still been some fascinating information. Now, one of the advantages of having horticulturally important crops like deciduous flowering magnolias there, and also having a dedicated team of volunteers is that you can gather some, information that's a benefit to gardeners, at least in the North Florida region. So over a period of years, we were able to calculate the dates of peak bloom of probably 30 or 40 of the cultivars in our collection, as you can see there in the chart on the right, along with the mean number of weeks of flowering for the cultivars. And so this is information that we can use to make recommendations to gardeners in the North Florida Gulf Coast area in terms of, hey, these are ones that are performing well from a flowering standpoint. If you want a late blooming one to avoid frost, these are the other ones you need to consider. So it's been fun to be able to pull this information together. Unfortunately, it's not something that it wasn't replicated, so I wasn't able to publish it in referee journal, but it is published in Magnolia Society. And so that's another way of getting out to the enthusiasts out there. In terms of the species and botanical varieties, this is the list of them there. I think there are 38, 40, something in that list. Of these, we have one that is considered the critically endangered. The orange are the endangered ones, and the vulnerable are in the purple. And so, and in addition to those, we have a couple that are Florida endangered too. So this is the vast number of them. And unlike the cultivars, probably 3/4 to 80% of these are evergreen species, with a smaller number of deciduous species. And it's really fascinating. The species from Southeast Asia just are so adaptable to North Florida because our climates are so similar. Hot, humid, rainy, and the soils are well adapted as well. So it's fascinating to be able to see them thrive under our conditions. And they're now being used in breeding programs for ornamentals too. I want to focus in on one of those. It's Magnolia spherantha. It is an Asian species found only in the province of Yunnan in China. Beautiful tree, evergreen, lovely, lovely flowers you can see in the photo, evergreen flowers and fruits. It is considered threatened by deforestation in China, and on the Chinese red list, it's considered to be vulnerable. And I was very fortunate, thanks to Dr. Gu, to be able to go to China to see this plant and even more. It turned out in 2013, I had an opportunity to travel to China with Dr. Gu and fellow Texan Dave Creech from the Stephen F. Austin University Arboretum, along with Dr. Yan Chen from LSU. And it was a fabulous trip, the best trip ever, Mama, best trip ever. But one of the places we visited was the Kunming Botanical Garden, and Kunming is the capital of Yunnan province. And the botanical garden is fabulous. It's well-known botanical garden, particularly for a magnolia collection. So I was really keen on visiting there. And as we were walking through the collection, I look up and what do I see? It was October. I see bright red fruits on magnolias. And this was in a grove of Magnolia spherantha trees. And they had been planted, they were collected from the wild, from a mountain nearby Kunming, and were planted here in the garden for display. And so I'm not sure exactly today how I did this, but I coerced my fellow travelers to get down on their hands and knees with me in the ground and scrabble like a squirrel to look for the red fruiting cones and the red seeds that we could kind of gather up, because I knew this was one that was not in the US for sure. And bless their hearts, they did. And so we picked up the cones in the ground, and out of these, I managed to clean in the hotel room at night 60 seeds, which we passed along to Richard Olson from the US National Arboretum, who happened to be there at the time. So he's the one who legally imported them into the United States for us. So this was October of 2013. He actually mailed the seeds to me in November of 2013. And so that was in the hotel. It was from right. You can see the watermark on the, So we got the seeds in December, and by March, as you can see in the top, I had seedlings. June, they were in 4-inch pots. And then by July, we actually had plants in 1 gallon and 3-gallon pots. Those suckers grew fast, let me tell you. But this was just using, conventional nursery practices here. And I didn't stop there. Once they got large enough, I started taking laterals for cuttings and found that the cuttings rooted very readily in, I think it was 8 to 12 weeks. It wasn't fast, but they did root. And I took 3 flushes of cuttings very quickly, so that numbers-wise, in a year, I went from 0 to almost 120 specimens of Magnolia sporantha, the species that up until then had never been found outside of China. So it was really cool to be able to do that. And I bulked them up, and then I started shipping them out. And so over the course of the next year or 2 years, between shipping them and driving them and dropping them off, we managed to distribute them to about 32 locations in North America. And primarily, these are in zones 8 and 9, where we suspect this tree is going to thrive, work best. And then the photo on the left is me in front of the specimen that we have at Quincy. So it's a very handsome specimen, has not flowered yet, but we're hoping for that soon. So this was very exciting to be able to do this and to demonstrate what you can do in a relatively short period of time. But, I didn't have to go to the other side of the world to work with an endangered magnolia. All I had to do was drive 25 miles west of where I was into the middle of that biodiversity hotspot that I was telling you about. And this is Torrey State Park along the Apalachicola River Basin, which is sort of central to this biodiversity hotspot, because it's very unusual. There are ravines here, and you don't think of Florida having ravines, but there are here. And so the large-leafed plant in the photos there is the ash magnolia, Magnolia macrophylla variety ashae, endangered, and it's found in only 9 counties in Florida, all on the Florida Panhandle. And they're found primarily in these ravine systems in the understory, shade. And you can see enormous leaves up to 3 feet long. They're very silvery and beautiful underneath. The flowers, easily 12 inches, and they flower at a very young age and a small size. So very exciting, very charismatic plant to be endangered. And then this shows you a little bit of the ravine systems that we have where they're found naturally. And the photo on the right, you can see seedlings there along the stream bankside there. So it's really, really fun to go and explore, except for the red bugs and ticks. But, what can you say? Get that everywhere. So again, with the proper permits from government authorities, we got permission to go in and collect fruits from the wild of this Torrey State Park and a nearby area, and then harvest the seeds from the fruits, plant out seedlings, grow them out, and then distribute them to North America. In this case, it's 19 sites in North America so far, but I just happen to have with me today a little ash magnolia seedling here. So boom, there you go, another star. Now, realistically, you are going to have to keep it in a pot or raised mulch bed. But nonetheless, the huge leaves are such a treat, and it flowers as short as 18 inches. So you'll get something out of it for sure. And all the information there, GPS code and everything is there. So anyway, this just goes to show what you can do, really, again, on a shoestring budget on the side, so to speak. And so we've been working with all the other species in the collection as well. And those are the species, and then the sites on the right are the number of places we've distributed plants to over the past 10 years, I guess it is. And then the category, and the ones that are highlighted in yellow are ones that are endangered or vulnerable that we've been able to work with and distribute. And, really, I ultimately have to give credit to the folks who gave me or allowed me to get these rare species to begin with. And it's from this network of connections that you make once you delve into a world of a particular species. And Magnolia Society has been great. So I'm very fortunate. This is what we were able to do. And we're trying to do things similarly with other species as well. And you know, real botanical gardens do this all the time, but they have, you know, huge staffs and travel budgets and things like that. And so I'm glad that we've been able to do this, you know, on the cheap, but we are able to get it done and get it out there and make a contribution too. So that's my story there. But of course, we can't do this, you know, out of my own pocket, at least not all the time out of my own pocket. So we've got to talk about actual funding of Gardens of the Big Bend. And I indicated a lot of it is in-kind services from NFREC. There have been times when NFREC has actually given us hard cash money to do things, several thousands of dollars, and that has gone a long way. But we get a lot of in-kind donations, fertilizer, pesticides, mulch, and so on. We've gotten grants from different groups to help support different things. And of course, the big thing these days is gifts and endowments. And as I indicated, the Heritage Garden is an endowment from Robert and Elaine Woodward. And that was real key to me to make that, because they are a prominent family in the Quincy, Tallahassee area. So now that we've had this inroads, hopefully we can leverage that to get a little bit more out of there. But we've got a couple endowments pledged to us. We've gotten several gifts along the way. Then the NFREC, as I said, provides resources. The GFBB volunteers raise probably about $15,000 a year for us. And in fact, they're probably a little peeved with me because I'm here having the time of my life in College Station, and they're preparing for a plant sale on Saturday. So, you know, I should be there moving plants or something right now. But you know, they're a great group, and it's fun. So that's funding. In terms of impacts of Gardens of the Big Bend, you know, I can't talk about visitors because, you know, we don't have a gate, we don't sell tickets. I can tell you the groups that we bring in that I give personal tours to, which is significant. I can tell you that the Gardening Friends group really leverages my extension appointment because they hold monthly meetings on their own, having a speaker every month, bringing in not only members, but the public. They hold, pre-COVID, they held about 1 or 2 special events every year. Again, you know, a workshop or bringing in special speakers that would attract the wider audience from Tallahassee and beyond. And so that's really leveraged my extension program at little or no cost to me, other than maybe a little bit of my time. You know, we can point to the conservation efforts in terms of an impact. We can point to the plants that we've distributed, not only the rare plants, but really the new and interesting plants that they sell in their plant sale, or evidence of getting some new plants out there. Pre-COVID, you know, their volunteer hours were worth a nice chunk of change and a good year at least. And then best of all, the gardens are used as a site for a NFREC Fall Festival. And so I'll sort of wrap up here with some of the shots from our Art, Garden, and Farm Family Festival, where we have vendors come out that are arts and crafts vendors or nursery vendors, plant vendors, you know, ply their wares and attract the crowds. A lot of fun. We have entertainment as well. We use our pavilion stage for music and for dancing. We have a woodwind quintet that comes out and plays live music. We've got a barbershop quartet that walks around and sings randomly at different places. We have tremendous numbers of activities for the kids. This is where we really try to focus in on the youth of the area. All the professors will also set up tables that are going to be youth oriented. So the entomologist will put out his insect collection, his pinned insect collection, and things like that. They'll have, you know, bales of corn seeds and cotton seeds and wheat seeds and so on for them to look at and play with. So it's a lot of research tours as well to go out to the field. And then, of course, once you get me started, it's hard to shut me up. So I'm always blabbing to groups out there or taking them through the gardens. So that's kind of gives you a picture of what we have going on. And that garden festival in particular, we like to boast that we bring in more people on that one day than the research center brings in all the rest of the year. And so that is why the administration and my fellow faculty members have really bought into the idea of Gardens of the Big Bend, because they can see, twice a month we have work days, the volunteers are there. Once a month they have a meeting. And then we have all these people that show up for the festival, and they really see the connections with the community that we're able to build by having the Gardens of the Big Bend there. So that's kind of our story, long and short of it. In terms of the future, we want more, more of everything, more plants, more money, more volunteers, more visitors. And I think we have the gardens that we're at the point where they're starting to mature. We're also starting to get the endowments and gifts coming in where we can make some improvements, hardscape-wise as well as garden-wise there. Signage is a real key for us right now. And we think it's going to be a good future, as we've already got a name for ourselves. We just have to promote ourselves a little bit more out there. So I invite you to come visit us. We're right on Interstate 10. If you ever do a road trip to Florida, I know it's a long way, but if you ever do a road trip to Florida, we are literally on exit 181. We're on all four corners of the exit, and the gardens entrance is just a half mile north of the exit there. So please stop and visit us. Adam Black stops there all the time because it's halfway between where he is in Texas and where he's going to in Florida. So it's a great site. So with that, I thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you especially for inviting me here to come and visit with you. I've so enjoyed the day today. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Sir. Yes.
Is that because of its being a source of medicinal compounds, or what's the reason that you?
Yeah, that's it. It has been used. There's been extracts from there that have been used, I believe, for cancer. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We've actually done some research on that here.
Yeah.
A while back, Dave Reed and I, very rapidly, did some
Yeah, Camptotheca, the happy tree is, I think, the common name for it. Very interesting, unusual fruits on that, too. Very interesting. Sisto. How many? Oh, visitors? No, we don't have a good, he asked how many visitors we have every year, and we don't have a good number of that. I can tell you how many people I personally give tours to, but the garden is open dusk till dawn, 365 days a year, so people can and do drive in and park and wander around and leave, and I never know they're there. That's something I think a lot of gardens have to wrestle with, and I don't know what we'll do, whether we'll have a gate someday or what, but sorry, don't know the answer. Dr. Arnold?
Yes. You had mentioned that quite a number of Magnolia had done quite well in the area. Is there any concern about escape and invasion?
Yeah, Dr. Arnold said that I mentioned that a lot of the Asian species of magnolias were doing particularly well in the garden, and if we were concerned about any escape seeding into the gardens or being distributed by birds or whatever elsewhere. To be honest, we go out and collect the fruit from them every year, and there aren't as many fruit as I would like. So based on that, just observational evidence, I don't think there's going to be a problem much from that standpoint. Something that I do probably need to look into is, the genus Magnolia, genus Magnolia is divided into different sections. And generally the sections don't interbreed well with each other. And I probably need to look at our native species, the sections they're in, and look at the sections of the Asian species to see if there's going to be a risk of gene introgression from hybridizing. That's probably more of a concern at this point. Hi. Yeah, good question. It was so frustrating. One year, oh yeah, the question, thank you. The question is, what do we do to secure the plants that are in our collection, since some of them are rare or beautiful or otherwise? And actually, in the early 2000s, we had a situation where we had planted some young trees of magnolias. They were flowering, and it was Mother's Day. And over the weekend, somebody drove through the field, plucked out all the newly planted magnolias that were flowering. And not to mention that, but they also destroyed the irrigation system as they drove through the field. And so that was quite disheartening. And so after that, we instituted a number of things. For one thing, we have a fence around it, and we're going to be actually expanding it to a deer fence in the next year as well. So that will help with security. The other thing that we've done with small plants or young plants that are appealing, or what the word is for it, is we'll take wooden dowels and pound them through the root ball into the soil below. And if you do a couple at angles like that, it doesn't disturb the root system. The wooden dowels, will eventually rot, but it allows that plant to root in, and it's not easily pulled up because of that. So that's the sort of thing we do in the grounds. And then other than that, the rest of our, the NFREC does have a fencing system and gates, and you can park and walk into the gardens, but you can't drive to our greenhouse and open it up, that sort of thing. Does that help? Good question. She was wondering if we have a greenhouse or a shade house collection of duplicates. I do often keep a backup plant for newly planted things, but our shade house is kind of weedy and slimy that I can't imagine anyone would want to venture in and look for it at this point. It needs to be replaced, and if we ever replace it, that'll be an issue probably. Yep. Dr. Dingler. There were 9 on the sign. You're right. There were 9 on the sign, plus magnolias and crepe myrtles, and they did not fit on that particular sign. We have a verbal note on the sign that the map doesn't, because otherwise we'd have plot land in between the gardens and the rest of the gardens. Are we considering cryopreservation of some plants in the collection? It's very fascinating. There's botanical gardens worldwide have sort of organized into a series of global consortia based on individual genera. So there is a global consortium for Magnolia, and the global consortium of Magnolia is working with the Huntington Botanical Garden and I believe it's a USDA facility in Colorado, where they have succeeded in preserving embryos of Magnolia species. Let me see if I get the terminology right here. Magnolia seeds are what they call non-recalcitrant, which means they cannot be stored for long periods of time because they would die or dry out and not be useful. And because of that, you can't have a seed bank of Magnolia species stored in a freezer or refrigerator or something like that. So what they have done is they've gone to tissue culture methods where they will excise the embryo, and then they've developed methods to preserve the embryos to do that. And that is brand new within the last few years. They've done that. I don't know that they've started a freezer collection yet, but they've got the techniques worked out. Hi, Doctor.
Places like in China, they have growth was spice that they can flower, or it's just something else talking about flowering.
Yeah, the question is the Magnolia spherantha plants that I grew from seed from China grew very large very quickly. And there was the photo of me with the one that was twice as tall as I am, and it wasn't flowering yet. And why is that the case? All I can say is that many woody plants take to have a requirement to grow for many years before they move from a juvenile to a mature phase where they can flower. And it's possible we may have not reached that yet, or the plants need a longer time or a larger size before they start flowering. Dan or Mike, anything to add to that? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's frustrating, but I'm just going to have to be patient, I guess.
Some people have been able to increase the rate of flowering if they graft the plant back onto itself. If you really need to flower.
Yeah. I've also heard that root pruning will sometimes stimulate that as well. Dr. Leinberger made the comment that by grafting a plant onto itself, sometimes that will stimulate flowering in the scion. There's another question.
You mentioned that in the early days you were collecting a lot of cultivar species from many folks. And that reminds me of kind of in Texas and all over the US, people trade fig cuttings.
Yeah.
And they claim, okay, this is this variety.
Yeah.
Yes, and they name it something else. You ever encountered that where somebody claimed it was something rare, but it's something bad?
Yeah, and unfortunately, you know, I trust people when somebody gives me something and tells me it's, you know, Magnolia zinganensis. I trust them that it is because I don't know the difference necessarily. And there have been a couple instances where, oops, it's actually something else. But generally, that doesn't happen until it flowers. It's really the flowers that taxonomists use to distinguish the species. And so I do have at least 3 specimens that I don't know what they are and they haven't flowered yet. And once they do, I'll send them to Dick Figler in South Carolina, a photo, and he'll be able to ID them for me. So, but yeah, that happens once in a while. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, what are some of the success stories of using grafting for propagating magnolias? And it's true, magnolias are widely propagated by grafting and budding in Europe and Asia, much more so than in the US. There are some in the US, but much more so elsewhere. And it's perfectly fine to do with proper root stocks. And in fact, there have been a couple research projects looking at various root stocks that I've been eagerly awaiting to be published that haven't been published yet. But because there are theories, philosophies that, you know, an evergreen scion should be grafted onto an evergreen rootstock that would have the same phenology in terms of when the sap runs, when it breaks bud, and so on. And on the other side of the coin, a deciduous one should be grafted onto a deciduous species that will not stimulate growth too early or make the growth come out too late. For Magnolia alba, what is a good rootstock for Magnolia alba? I don't know. Gosh, I don't know. And you know, I don't know how. That species is champaca, right, or champaca, isn't that? That one is sold in South Florida as a flowering tree, and I don't know whether they do it from cutting seed or grafting. I don't know. And I would suspect you'd have to get a tropical species, and I don't know. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much.